separate training sessions, and these ones will be recorded. So there is a session in October on working specifically with learners who have no English or are beginners. And these will be recorded and shared with everyone. So if you can't make the live one, you'll get these. And there's another then for intermediate and advanced. But these are just a starting point, and I suppose some tips for people who've never done anything like this before. Working with beginners, if you have a background in teaching or teaching English as a foreign language, some of these may come very naturally to you. But for me, I know when I first started tutoring and volunteering with Fáilte Isteach as a tutor, these were tips that I found really, really useful. So being mindful of the way you speak yourself is important. And this doesn't mean, changing who you are or changing your accent or becoming a totally different person. It's just being mindful and conscious of how you speak and the words that you use. So, as an example, when I am nervous or in a new situation, I tend to start to speak very, very quickly. I also have a very, very bad habit of using the words like and so filler words as I'm talking. If I'm speaking to somebody who is fluent in English, they're able to block out all those filler words that are peppering my language and hear what I'm saying and pull out the right words. If I'm speaking to somebody who's new to the language or is learning it as a second or ninth language, whatever they might be, that can be really confusing because you're trying to grab at words you understand to comprehend what's being said and then formulate a response. So slow things down. And this also can really impact the environment of the group as well. If I come into a group and I'm flustered and I'm speaking quickly and I'm sort of talking to myself, where's that resource? So I thought I had a picture. Everybody gets kind of tense, So be calm, don't panic, even if you're not quite sure what you're going to do next or what you're going to say. Just slowing things down can really impact how everybody feels in the group, and just to keep it nice and calm. And just consider maybe how you're asking questions or the language that you're choosing to use. So something very common for Irish people, as an example, is asking 4 or 5 questions without pausing for an answer. So, hi, how's it going? The weather is shocking. I was just up in the blah 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 in the shop there. What are you up to next weekend? So you've asked maybe 4 questions and thrown in a statement about something you've done, and then you're on to the weekend. That learner might be will be still on hi, how are you? So just to be conscious of that, especially in those first few meetings with new learners, just to keep it slow, and try to encourage learners to speak more than you do. If in a beginner class you reflect on it and you have been talking 90% of the time, there's something wrong there and you need to switch up the approach. So that's when you would bring in a resource or some sort of turn taking activity to make sure that it's not you speaking and leading the class all the time. And it very, very easily happens, especially with a brand new group and everybody's a little bit nervous. So do be conscious of that, I suppose, and mindful that that can happen. Allowing time for understanding is really important there, as I mentioned too. So thinking of the learner, hearing what you've said, understanding it, formulating that response, and then saying it out loud. Like, give good space for that. Lean into the silence a little bit, and it can feel awkward at times. 10 seconds can feel like a long time, but resist the temptation to jump in too soon for learners and allow them to use the language that they do have, especially in the first few weeks. That's going to give you a real sense of where they're at as well in terms of level, even if it takes them a little bit of time, but you can see they're thinking about it. Obviously, if you feel that they're panicking and don't have a clue what you've said, then you can assist, but do give them that space to try and to use the language that they do have. Encouraging questions and using gestures to do this is quite effective. So with a higher level, you can just ask the learners, have you understood that? Do you need me to go back over things? Is that all making sense to you? And they'll be able to respond. with this level of learner, it's important to make sure you're checking in regularly, and not sort of flying through topics or lists of words and everybody nodding, saying they understand, and maybe not quite understanding. So make sure either you do an activity that checks in to sort of revise maybe any new words, get people to say things aloud, but also use gestures as you're asking those questions. Do you want me to slow down, or do you want me to go back over this? So use a gesture to enhance what you're saying. You won't have to do those gestures, every class till the end of time. But if you establish an environment where those learners know that it is not a problem to stop you, to say that they don't understand, or to ask you to repeat something, that environment then is established. And it can be really, really beneficial for the learners just to feel that they can do that. A lot of learners, classes are very diverse. So you may have a learner who is very used to an educational setting, has, a PhD, might speak 8 or 9 different languages, just English isn't one of them. You may also have learners who have never been in a formal education setting, may have low literacy in their own language, as an example. So, giving people the space to sort of get used to learning something new is important as well. Repetition at this level is really crucial too, and just allowing learners to use the new language in as many ways as possible. And that doesn't mean drilling or doing it in a really formal, structured way. It can just be as simple as thinking of a couple of activities that you can do around a single resource that will just allow each of those learners to practice and retain and cement any new language. So, as an example, maybe you bring in a picture of a landscape that has some weather in it. There might be 10 new words depicted in that image. You might start by pointing at those new words, the visuals of them, and saying each one aloud. Then maybe you might ask each learner to take a turn, and to say, see if they can recall 2 or 3 of those new words while pointing at the visual. Now, if it's appropriate within your group, let's see, does anyone want to write those new words down in English and maybe in their first language as well, which is really useful for learners, and that can be encouraged. And now let's try and pick 2 of these words each and use them in a simple sentence. I'm going to give you the sentence and you fill in the gaps verbally. Now, from that, let's try and have a really simple real world interaction. So let's have conversation, a little role play about the weather, as an example. So you're always trying to get to that conversational element. You're always trying to bring it to a real world situation. But obviously, with this level, you need to give them the building blocks first. You need to build the language, allow them to practice, and then to try it. And maybe the takeaway then from that Fáilte Isteach session is go and try and have this conversation, out in the real world. That's your homework, for want of a better word, a little challenge, and just get people to use the language and encourage them to use the language. So without much prep, bar bringing in a picture and having a couple of ideas, you've allowed each of those learners to hear all of those new words said correctly, say them themselves, see them written down, see a visual, use them in a sentence, and use them in real conversation. So really effective, far more likely that they will recall those words the following week. Mhm. Also, I will send you this tutor training manual. So there are hard copies of these. For any group that doesn't have them, if you'd like a hard copy, I'll send you the digital version. But if you would like a hard copy, just let your coordinator know and we'll send you out some of the booklets. There's loads in here. So again, like all our resources, they're not meant to be read necessarily cover to cover, but there just might be some nice ideas for things that you can do to help learners along in classes. So with this level, you'll have the elementary and the beginner books to help you, if you feel you'd like to use those. But also, think outside the box with resources. our tutors would use real objects, bring in bags of shopping. The Aldi catalogues are very popular, bus timetables, local maps, pictures, recipe books, all those types of things are really, really good resources. The more local, the more relevant, the better. Things that people can relate to, things that people are seeing every single day. For example, one of the classes that we did recently in City West focused on all the sort of signs, things like exit, entry, all those signs that you see around the place. And a tutor also took like a picture of the train ticket screens, when you're getting a train ticket, of each stage of that. And they use those pictures on their phone as a resource to talk about and go through the language that somebody might see every day. So think again about everyday life. All of those things are resources, and they all work really, really well. Real objects, there's lots of like fun games you can put into classes as well. Once you sort of build a rapport with learners, we have one tutor who always brings in a rucksack with 3 or 4 random items, and then all the learners put their hand in and have to figure out what's in there and then describe it. So use descriptive words, really good if you've been covering that or talking about that the week before. And these can be elevated from beginner all the way up to more advanced. You can adapt how you use the resources in depending on the level you're working with. With intermediate learners, then conversation is a different thing. It's a lot more two-way. You're really building on existing vocabulary at this stage. Often things like opposites or emotions, so more complex concepts. Fáilte is primarily about speaking and conversation, less about reading and writing. But a little bit of reading or using a real text at this level can be really, really useful. So a local paper, you don't have to dive into a 2,000 word article. It can just be a headline, and maybe you won't read anything at all. You'll just say a headline out loud or use a picture from a paper and a caption. Ask the learners, what do you think this is about? Have you heard anything about it? So conversation starters, essentially, just things to talk about that may be of interest. And learners, of course, if they're coming to you with things that they want to discuss, then they're good starting points, and resources can fill in the gaps there. Maps are great. These are really popular, whether it's using a map of Ireland to talk about where things are, the geography of the country, to world maps, to local walking maps of your town. Um, I think understanding where you are or where they are for a lot of learners is really important. And to any of us, when you go to a new place or you move somewhere new, getting a sense of place and where you are living and what defines it is important to feeling that sense of belonging as well. So many of our learners know very little about where they have arrived to recently enough. We work a lot in City West transit hub, where is kind of a first stop before people are transferred to accommodation. And there's 720 men living there, and we do like 9 classes a week. And when they are transferred, they wait for the bus. They don't know where they're going. They get on the bus and then they're told you're going to Ennis or wherever it might be. And then they're texting us back in the class saying, where is Ennis? Is it near the sea? And they're Googling desperately. So it's not the case that people know a lot about what they're going. So that information is really essential for a lot of people. So explore if that's of interest to your group, bring in a map, see if that's engaging for them. Recipe books are great. When in doubt, talk about food. It is a great universal topic. People either like eating it or making it or both. We had a class that a tutor brought in a handwritten recipe that he always made. And then he asked, and he went through it and talked about how to make it. And he asked then every learner to do the same the following week. And each learner brought in a handwritten recipe that was important to them or their family or has always been cooked in their family in their first language. And they translated it all. They found out the words for the ingredients in English, where they could buy those things. A really everyday thing, but very, very meaningful. So those type of things are really good, and it's a great topic to get started on. And I'd encourage you to work, if you can, if you're not sure, to work with those universal topics. Maybe before you jump into things like family or home, or even concepts like the future. These are things that we cover in the trauma training as well. But those topics, as you can imagine, are quite default for us to ask about, but can be difficult for people to discuss. So, for the first couple of classes, try to do universal topics rather than maybe ending up asking lots of questions about family or home, or maybe what the learners are going to do in the future, or how long they might be staying here. Sometimes people just don't have the answers to those questions and can feel stressed by them. So leave that for when you get to know people more. And always, I suppose, the sort of rule there is let the learner lead as much as possible. Allow the learners to sort of discuss what they're happy discussing, and then you can take it from there. And we talk about that a lot more in the trauma training as well. Encouraging practice at home is always useful. There's no homework or requirement for this, but lots of our groups will give their learners those little challenges that I mentioned, or give them something to listen to. Maybe you listen to a podcast or a radio show every morning. They might share that link with the learners, 5-10 minutes, and it'll give us something to talk about next week. Maybe TV nationwide, or news with subtitles or something like that. So always really useful. Obviously, the more a learner practices, the quicker they're going to progress. So if you feel that's appropriate, you can do that for sure. So I am aware that I am very short on time. So there's a little bit left on advanced learners, but I will send you the notes for these because I just want to check if there's any questions, and also share my email.